My name is Elena Prodan. I'm going to make my opening remarks in my capacity as the chair of the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training. And I'm also a staff member of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. So, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, in my capacity as the current chair of GIST, I have the pleasure of opening this important event for our network. It marks a significant milestone in our efforts to provide not only coordinated, but also high-impact support to national statistical offices as they have to step up to ever more challenging tasks and innovate in the face of an increasingly complex environment full of opportunities but also challenges. Firstly, what is GIST? GIST has been conceived with an idea that together we are more than a sum of the parts. By harnessing the collective power of our institutions, we can leap forward much faster. We can promote synergies and avoid duplications, exchange good practices, and develop joint knowledge products. As a result, between now and 2017, we have accomplished a number of achievements. We have launched a joint gateway that promotes access to e-learning on statistics.unsglearn.org. We have conducted research to better understand the official statistics training landscape across the world and the needs. We developed an inventory of statistical literacy initiatives. These are just some of the highlights from the work of the 3 task teams that have been spearheading our results. Task team on addressing NSO demands, whose work we are featuring today, in fact, co-led by US Census Bureau and Statistics Norway. We have the representatives here. Task team on e-learning community of practice that was co-led by UNCAP and FAO. We also have colleagues here who were leading this task team. And the task team on statistical literacy currently led by Statistics Portugal and International Statistical Literacy Project. In fact, Pedro has 2 hats. And IBGE, NSO Brazil. Today, we will be presenting a tool called STAT that was developed and piloted in 2023 in the first phase by 4 countries, Mexico, Maldives, Malawi, and Papua New Guinea. And in phase 2 by 2 more countries, Ghana and Colombia, who have taken a step further jointly with GIST and from whom you will be hearing today. I would like to thank all the pilot countries for doing this work and their important support. Essentially, STAT is about making training and capacity development for NSOs and national statistical systems nationally driven, nationally tailored, and nationally owned. It is about being more strategic in human resource development, as this is the main resource that national statistical systems have. The tool is expected to help countries define what kind of competencies their staff needs in alignment with their organizational objectives. It helps to develop them systematically, including by considering the use of in-house capacity to deliver training, and it helps to navigate a complex landscape of globally available expertise and learning opportunities. The tool helps more specifically to identify knowledge and skill gaps and prioritize the most important ones to be addressed, taking into account the limitations in financial resources, staff time, and readily available learning opportunities. Essentially, it can serve as a foundation for developing midterm capacity development or training strategies for NSOs and national statistical system staff and promote both formal and informal learning. It can help decide where resources should come from based on the type of a learning need and available training expertise and offers, and develop training programs in-house or in collaborations with national, regional, or international partners. This work will be complemented by the work of the new GIST language group, led by the Arabic Institute for Research and Training in Statistics, and a new group that GIST is about to establish in follow-up to its annual meeting, a group that will promote knowledge sharing among NSOs on making learning, different types of learning, part of the organizational culture of NSOs, and enhancing training and learning expertise within the organizations. This is seen as a crucial factor by many national statistical offices in improving performance, motivating their staff, who may now have other opportunities from the private sector, and developing individual and organizational capacities in line with their strategic priorities. We will hear more about the tool, but also about the experience from our 2 second phase pilot countries today. We hope that you will find the tool a valuable resource that can be used with or without our support. And I thank you for your attention and pass the floor to Vibeke Nielsen, who is Interregional Advisor with UN Statistics Division and is representing the GIST Secretariat here.
Thank you very much, Elena. I'm very pleased to be moderating the first part of this side event to the UN Statistical Commission. As Elena was saying, I represent the UN Statistics Division that has the secretariat role for GIST. We're very happy to be launching this tool today. The next speaker is Charlotte Juhl-Hansen, who is a consultant with UN Statistics Division and has been helping the global network of institutions for statistical training in developing the STAT tool. So over to you, Charlotte.
Okay, I just have to find the presentation. 1 second. Okay, so I will give you an introduction to what the Statistical Training Needs Assessment tool actually is. So in brief, STAT, as we also call it, is a tool for NSOs to assess, analyze, and prioritize and meet learning needs to produce official statistics. It focuses on all staff within the organization, so not only those working in the statistics production, but also people who works with IT, communication, dissemination, HR, finance, administrative functions, secretarial functions, managers. So we kind of try to capture everyone because everyone has a very important role in the functioning of the NSO. STAT also gives an option to assess the training needs within the national statistical system. So for those staff that works with statistics production in ministries and other public authorities. STAT is intended also to give the NSO a better overview of where external support is needed and use that information to engage with international regional organizations, for example, to discuss where they have training needs. If in-house and nationally available resources are lacking. We're also really trying to promote this. So just going back. So I will lead you through the 4 phases that we call assess, analyze, prioritize, and meet. So in order to assess the skill gaps and training needs, we have 3 questionnaires in Google Forms. We have one for staff and managers to self-assess their individual level of knowledge and their training needs. We have a questionnaire for managers at the NSO to assess how they see the gaps in their team's ability to perform current and future tasks. So in a way, what are the institutional needs? And then we have the questionnaire for the staff that work within the NSS. So we have identified a bit more than 150 different skills for the different type of job functions. So when staff fill in the questionnaire, they are directed to the section with skills relevant for the job. So they don't answer questions on all 150 skills. The questionnaires are set up to be flexible. So the country can adjust this questionnaire because we also know, of course, there are differences in countries and how some skills might be more important than others, and some countries might think that some skills are missing in the questionnaire, so it's possible to adjust that as needed. So here's the content of the questionnaire. So we have, of course, some basic information about the respondents, but we also have some questions about how staff prefer to learn and what are their attitude to learning. And this, we think, is important information, in particular if the organization is trying to change the way staff are learning. For example, people might prefer to do classroom training, but we know that's expensive and costly. So if you want to promote the more extensive use of e-learning, for example, you might need to work with the attitudes of staff in using e-learning as a way to learn. And then we move on to the different sections depending on where staff work. So we have, of course, our staff that work in the statistics production. And that section is the most extensive one because people can work in all different parts of the statistics production. So we have these sub-sections where there are different skills in each of those. Yeah, and then we have our other staff, and then at the end we have a section that's relevant for all staff that digs more into knowing a bit more about the NSS. There are also personal skills that we ask about, and some basic software skills. So the Google Forms kind of ask two questions on the left side. The first question is on what is your level of knowledge, and the staff can then identify where they see themselves on that range of knowledge. In a way, so not all of the skills are relevant if you work in, let's say, data analysis, for example. So you only answer on those skills that's relevant to your work. And then we afterwards ask about what is the priority to receive training. It might not be a high priority for one skill, but you might have a very high priority for other skill. And this information is important to later on for the organization to decide what are the training needs where the organization have the highest priorities. So to analyze the data, Stat provide R codes that extract the data from Google Sheets that comes from the Google Forms into Power BI. So we have set up Power BI with ready-made visualizations. They can be changed, of course, if the country wants to do that, but it comes as a package. So we kind of set up, these are good tables to analyze the data. And of course, the guidance document in Stat provides step-by-step guides on how to do this analysis and how to move from Google Forms to Power BI at the end. And the three questionnaires are set up in a similar way, so you can compare the answers between the staff and the managers and the staff in the NSO, in the National Statistical System, because you can use that also when you develop your training plan later on. And of course, this is also an opportunity for staff in the NSO to learn more about R and Power BI, because it's not that complex setup as such, so it's kind of like a closed environment. So if someone are not that familiar with R, it's actually also a learning opportunity in itself. So here we have a slide on how it looks in Power BI. This is an example on personal skills. So the first table up here shows what the level of knowledge is, and the other graphs show the priority of the training need. And this information is used eventually when you do also your training plan. Here we have a graph on the learning preferences and the attitude. So on the left side, the blue graph, we ask people of all type of different ways of learning. And as you will see later on, Stat also tries to promote to use a variety of different learning approaches. So not only our more typical classroom training, but there are so many different ways we can all learn. And then we also have our statements on learning. So once we have the data displayed, we need to start to prioritize, and this is the most difficult part of Stat, because what you will see if you do the survey is that there's a lot of training needs, and there's a lot of high priority training needs. So how do you make your decisions? Because we all have limited resources, and you can't, of course, offer everything. So Stat lists some recommendation and different criteria for how to prioritize. You can say, for example, a criteria could be if you have many who have a training need over a few, so maybe it's important to say, well, maybe we have so many staff that has indicated a need in this area, then we need to give this area some attention. But on the other hand, you also have areas where maybe you just have a few people who have a training need, but it's a very important area for the institution because it might be a new area. So you need to invest in saying, okay, well, maybe there will not be a lot of people. We don't have the benefit of training many, but it's an important area. And then we also discovered when we did the pilot, there are differences also between what managers and individual staff identify as training needs. And of course, this is also some discussion to have when you make this decision at the end. What should we focus on in our training plan? And then another area is that people have different need for training at different levels. Some don't have any knowledge and would need some basic entry training, while others are more advanced but still need training because what they do is at a more advanced level. And that, of course, that's another complexity to ensure that people get training at the right level. Because we know, of course, also that when people are trained at not the right level, it's not interesting, but they also don't learn what they need to learn at the end. And also when you make the prioritizing or go through that process, the organizational priorities overall, what are our priorities now as an organization, but also where do we see ourselves going in the future? It's important to make those decisions. If you want to move more into administrative data, you might need to focus on training in those areas, though your staff might not have indicated that this is something they need training in. So all this information at the end will hopefully lead into this nice list of prioritized training needs that you can put into an institutional training plan over 2 to 3 years. And it's a good idea also to involve the staff at different levels of the organization to create this ownership. So that's what STAT is also trying to encourage. So the last phase is, of course, the meeting aspect. We have a section on developing a training strategy because making training a strategic priority of the organization is, of course, important if you want to do if you want to give it the attention it needs. We also talk about how to create a learning organization because learning is not only by getting education, it's also by sharing knowledge among colleagues. It's about learning from the errors that the organization will, of course, experience when you do your work to kind of make people comfortable in where they are and to see everything as a learning opportunity in a way. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have this focus also on increasing the use of different type of learning approaches, both informal learning, but also formal learning. I have a list here of some of the first bullet or the more informal learning approaches. E-learning is something we also try to promote, and we have a long list of links to e-learning platforms that are available. Platforms that focus only on statistics training, but also platforms that focus on other areas, more the personal skills or management skills, etc. What we also, or what STAT also does, is try to encourage the use of in-house expertise because they're experts in all NSOs, and those experts can be used to train other colleagues. It also has the benefit of that training can be more targeted because the organization itself knows what's needed. And it can also be a motivation for staff who are engaged in training others. It's another way for them also to learn. And we have a focus also on training of new staff. So we provide a list of some of the skills that new staff might need when they start within the organization, and where those training needs can be met by using e-learning courses. So we have links to that as well. So getting close to the end, so staff kind of promotes new ways of improving staff skills. One thing is this, that learning takes many forms. It doesn't take place only in the classroom. Of course, learning while doing the job is the most important thing. So we all learn while we do our job. But there are also different informal and formal learning approaches. Of course, knowledge sharing is very key. And the understanding that you will get from the questionnaires on the learning preferences and learning attitudes of staff can also help to see where you kind of need to motivate staff to learn in other ways if the results show that they have a very clear preference for maybe one or two learning styles. And then again, as I said, the use of staff as trainers, and then the use of free e-learning, because there's so much available. The use of e-learning can sometimes be a very lonely experience when you sit, and it can also be difficult because you don't have anyone to ask necessarily. But there are different ways to try to accommodate that by, for example, in Ghana, we actually talked about using the training center to have a group of people taking the same e-learning in the same room, for example, is a way they can sit and support it, and you can have discussions around that. People can also do the e-learning separately, and then you can create discussions groups, so the learners meet on a regular basis, either with a support staff who has more experience in the area, or just by themselves as a way to support each other and their learning path. So the next step for STAT is that it's in English now. We have a Spanish version of the old version, so we need to update the Spanish version, and then we want to translate it into French, and many, probably also other languages as we move along. And then we want to work more with countries and regional organizations to implement STAT in different countries. And the guidance document, which is a nice piece of 50 pages, very interesting reading. I can highly recommend it. We also want to do it maybe a bit more interactive on the website. And then finally, we have our GIST website, and we are on it now. The tools are available there. We have 7 different components of STAT, which includes the R codes and Power BI, etc. And the QR code leads you to that page. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. And we are, of course, also here afterwards if you want to discuss with us regarding making use of the tool yourselves. We now will have presentations from the 2 pilot countries, from Colombia and from Ghana. And I want to start with Colombia, with Juliet Alejandra Solano Villa, who is the director at the National Administrative Department of Statistics, that is DANE. And she will be presenting the experience of Colombia in pilot testing the tool.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experience. I'm Juliet Solano, Technical Director of Regulation and Quality of the National Statistical Office of Colombia. In case I run out of time, I just want to leave the key message based on our experience. The first is that it's very important to have these guidelines and tools to assess the training needs, not only at the National Statistical Office, but the statistical agencies of the system. This is very important. And the second thing is that it's also a needed step in order to ensure that we have the skills and capabilities to respond to new demands and the changing context we are facing. It's also important to keep in mind that in the process of defining the training plan, it's also important to consider all the alternatives you could have based on what Charlotte was mentioned, not only the face-to-face traditional training, but all the possibilities that you have in your own staff to provide that training. And we consider, finally, these kind of tools allow us to monitor, to define our plans, to monitor and evaluate the results and impacts we are having in terms of the skill we want to promote in our staff. So with this in mind, we are recent members of the GIST, but we have a very increased demand in order to improve the way we are providing training based on the strategic plan we have at the statistical office. So we commit from the high level to participate in this pilot. We have a preparation of the pilot in which we translate the questionnaire to Spanish. We respect the spirit of the questionnaires and make some minor adjustments to facilitate the comprehension in Spanish. So with this, we developed also an electronic questionnaire to facilitate the filling of the questionnaires for our staff and start the collection process between September, and we make all the process of recovery from some questionnaires and make the processing and analysis of the results we have. For that, we use a dashboard. We also build a dashboard in Power BI to present the results and facilitate the analysis. And we have the opportunity to participate in a workshop with Helena and Charlotte that was very enriched to define the priorities and to structure the plan. So we, since the beginning, we decided that we are going to implement the pilot with all our staff, not only like the public servants we have in the regular statistical or support areas, but also with the management level. So we have a very good response. We have the participation of more than 247 people for our staff in the individual needs assessment. 57 members of our management level participated in the institutional needs assessment questionnaires, and we have 9 entities of our national statistical system that also participate in the process. And this was a very important output of the pilot because allow us to recognize their training needs. We're very focused on the statistical office, but when we think in the capacities or skills of other entities in the system, it's important to open that training plan to include them. So in terms of the performance of the questionnaires, we found that 75% of respondents considered that it was simple to complete the questionnaires, but we have some comments in terms of the extension of the questionnaires. It was perceived like in some cases it was long, and that some part of the staff perceived also that the specific work they were doing were not reflected in the questionnaires. So we have like some skills that were not considered in the process. We also have some challenges processing the open questions because it was difficult to provide the specific guidelines in order to ensure that for these questions. So we need to process it manually in order to get inputs from it. And we also have the results in terms of some skills, for example, related with the use of Power BI, the Azure cloud management, and other remote sensor services that were not considered in the questionnaires. So there are additional skills that our staff consider that is also important to prioritize. As part of the workshop we have on November with Charlotte and Helena, we could identify not only the things that we need to improve in the questionnaires to facilitate the assessment, but also they helped us a lot with the prioritization because it was really hard, where to focus the attention when we have the needs of a staff, the differences between what staff is perceiving they need and the managers perceive they want to have in their staff. So they help us a lot with this process through working groups, discussions with the different members of our staff and management, and with the SEN entities, the National Statistical System entities, which allow it to define some priorities. So as a result of this process, we have inputs to improve and enrich the stat questionnaires and the process of execution of the assessment, but also inputs for update the Spanish version. We are committed to provide this Spanish version of the questionnaires and tools in order to facilitate implementation across the region, and also inputs for Dane to develop his in-house training. This is one screen of our dashboard on Power BI that facilitates the consulting and analysis of the results for all the members of the staff and managers. With these results of the pilot, we were able to prioritize our training topics for this year, considering not only the traditional process that we have in terms of surveys and the results, for example, of the staff development surveys or the training satisfaction surveys that we made, but also considering the results of the stat questionnaires. This was important because it allows us to see that it's also we need to focus not only in the use of statistical software and methodology and so on, but soft skills like leadership. It was also important, and our staff are asking for that kind of training too. In terms of the strategy that we follow to start to defining this, so we consider some aspects that, based on the legislation we have as public entity, we need to follow in terms of the training plans, but also the stat inputs allow us to prioritize the results of the training assessment and to identify alternatives to provide that training. We were very focused in the traditional training, like a face-to-face training, some virtual courses, but thanks to this pilot, we learned that we also could empower our staff to provide a specific training that is also needed. As a specific methodology that we want to increase their use is, for example, small area estimations. And now we have people in our staff that have the opportunity to learn others how to use this specific methodology. So it's a good alternative. And also we could provide the training in a more informal way, like workshops, conversation, exchange of knowledge, peer-to-peer review, or focus on specific problems we want to overcome, and around that, propose the training plan. So thanks to this pilot, we identify all these possibilities, and also the one that is related with establishing some pathways. We have some staff members that we need that they have skills and knowledge on specific topics and areas. So we could suggest them a path how to they improve the processing analysis skills, suggesting specific courses for that. And we have other part of our staff that we want to enrich these skills on, for example, expertise or some thematic domains. So these allow us to define some paths and suggest them as part of the definition of the plan. Right now, we are in the hard part of closing the training plan, and for this, we are also getting the involvement of academia as a way to help us to provide part of this training. So I think with this learning at the pilot, we have a lot of tools to improve the way we are providing the training in our statistical offices, but also in the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliette. And as you see, most of the work has been done by the 2 pilot countries. The GIST team has only really been supporting, and you've been driving this so much. So thanks for doing that. The second driver is Ghana, and we will be hearing from Professor Samuel Anim, who is the Director General of the Ghana Statistical Service. And he will talk about how he and DSS is using the STAT tool to ensuring that staff have the needed skills during the transformation of GSS. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Vibeke. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. So we've heard from 2 presenters on the STAT, and let me learn from what my colleague did. Let me say 4 quick things to keep us in mind in terms of the conversation that we're going to have. One is that going forward, the STAT is indispensable. We all have to embrace it. The second is that it should be very context-specific. As Vibeke indicated, different countries are going through different processes of engaging with statistics. Some countries are heavily on the user side, data collection. Some are heavy on the data processing side. Some are heavy on the stewardship side. So it has to be embraced, having the context in mind. The second thing is that we should know that training either crowds in or competes with other needs of staff. If it comes to transformation, the only way out is you need to have training. But if you are working in an environment where the demands of staff are things related to their financial incentives, their working conditions, and so on, then training becomes a competitor. So we always need to keep in mind, one, the context in which we are working with, and secondly, the fact that training can compete out or to crowd out some other interventions. I look at this presentation from an evolution point of view, and what I'm trying to do is some questions that we ask ourselves at the initial stages. Obviously, not all we were able to ask at the initial stages, so some are based on introspection and going forward things that we're going to change. Then I put into quotes, scouting for a desirable approach. As I did indicate, there isn't any blueprint that we followed as a country when the issue of training came up. I think my first conversation with Vibeke was just ahead of the pandemic, and having come from academia, all that I was thinking about is how do we get a structured training to build capacity within the service? Then what conversation did we have with GIST and the start to the output that we've seen out of it, and obviously share with you some thoughts going forward. So this presentation is in the context of transformation, and pardon me if some of these things are pretty straightforward. As national statistical offices, I know we all want to see some form of transformation given what is happening at a global level, especially from the evolution of non-traditional data source perspective. But the key question is whether we've documented this transformation. That is a necessary condition, but a more sufficient condition is whether the pathways of the transformation have been documented. I mean, we all would want to drive data production in terms of our outputs, want to do more stewardship, but how we intend doing it in terms of these pathways are questions that we need to ask ourselves. And again, my colleague from Colombia did talk about the issue of scale. So once you're thinking about transformation, it's very unfortunate that most of us, I tell policy makers in my country that we think NSS is a synonym for NSO. But once you think NSS is a synonym for NSO, then we've lost the fight to begin with. So anytime you're thinking about transformation and you are able to clearly distinguish between how one would be a trigger for the other, so that whatever happens in the National Statistical Office will be a trigger for what should happen in the National Statistical System. Then the fourth question is a better understanding of the existing capacity that you have in your office. I did mention earlier on that, and I think Vibeke, you did talk about it. We have a lot of training going on. If you get to Ghana Statistical Service now, we are doing mentorship program. We've identified people from academia. They are doing one-on-one engagement with people in our staff. We have instituted a working paper series and encouraging staff to write, because what we are thinking about is how to drive the data stewardship part of things, and then this training that people have on peer-to-peer basis. So anytime you are thinking about training, it's important you say this component of it is structured, this component of it is unstructured, but the most important thing is how you integrate both the structured and unstructured training that you have. Two key questions, issues that I talked about earlier on. Anytime you think about capacities, you need to think about it in the context of the incentives. And in the context of incentives, staff are always concerned about two things: their progression and the value of work. Here, I'm careful, I don't say earnings, but I say value of work. A lot of us might be working in jurisdictions where the earnings part is well satisfied, but some of us, both the earning monetary side and the non-monetary side is a challenge. So once you think about capacities, their related progression, the first thing you need to think about is whether it's aligned with work outputs, and two, whether it's aligned with the value of work. Internal and external resources that are available for training. And last but not the least, we talk about the issues around culture, commitment. The penultimate, the culture and commitment. But the last one, which I talked about, is why training? Is it a priority? As the Director General, is one of the priorities. And this is related to exactly the opening remark that I made. Because if it's coming at a time that staff are agitating for incentives, financial incentives, you better concentrate on that, have calm in the system before you think about building capacity. But once staff embrace transformation, then training becomes a priority. So we started searching for the desirable approach. Again, I put desirable because it has to be context specific. So at management meetings, board meetings, conversations around auditing skills, structuring knowledge mechanisms came up. But then the documentation came through. So in 2020, we had our corporate plan just to define the path that we want to have. And then we developed what we call the competency framework, just about the same time. This competency framework simply clears in more detail from an analytical point of view what we need from staff at each stage of the way of progression. This is different from what your scheme of service will tell you as what our public services institutions demand. But clearly, this goes into details in terms of persons' specificity. The fourth issue that I talk about, which if I'm giving this to my staff, I'll be hesitant saying, is what I call the ICE brain approach. As CEO, at any point in time, given your context, you need to think about how you inject brains in the system, how you circulate brains in the system. The first two I was able to tell my staff when I was doing my first day, but the last one I was hesitant because you don't go to your staff and say that I'm also thinking about exiting brains. But really, if you are thinking about how to maintain a certain level of staff in your institution, the ICE approach is critical. Injection, circulation, and exiting of brains to get what you want to do. Then, if you really want to understand how this will be successful, as I said, it's context specific. If you do it strictly a top-down approach, you might have challenges. So what we thought of doing was to do a staff satisfaction survey. And from that staff satisfaction survey, thankfully, we identified training as one of the leading issues. So clearly, although it was a top-down approach, through the staff satisfaction survey and based on the findings, we realized that it's a bottom-up need. So that convergence, that equilibrium was reached. Since this is in the context of transformation, and as I indicated earlier on, all of us here want to have data science in our respective NSOs. But I wonder a number of us who have documented the roadmap for our data science. So a couple of years back, we said, all the transformations that are happening globally, we should have a roadmap to that. So what you see here is our document on the roadmap for injecting data science into the system. So as a way of injecting brains, a couple of years back, we recruited 9 people, data science background, to inject data science skills into the system. Then if you really want to get them to understand the power of training, you need to begin to measure your output. So what you see on the right-hand side is telling us how progressively we've increased our number of publications. So if we sit at management meetings, we ask different directors, tell us how are you contributing to the increases in the publications that are happening. Over time, we need to get each staff to tell us that, how have you contributed to it? Obviously, this is based on the bias that I'm coming from an environment where it's about publication, it's about pushing stewardship. But once you do that, people are able to link outcomes of training to the work that we are doing in the office. Then Vibeke and Charlotte talked about a mix of capacity building interventions and also the need to plan your successes. So I started this conversation with Vibeke 2019, as I indicated, and the first conversation was, how do we consolidate all the things that are happening? How do we scout the training resources and collaborations that we have? How do we do peer learning across different NSOs, which are different levels of engagement, depending on production or stewardship? Integrate both the hard and soft skills and the organizational capabilities, and define the capacity building outputs. Indeed, these conversations are what led to Ghana being one of the pilot countries in my mind. So what are the things that we've seen so far? And I'm going to quickly run through this because Charlotte has mentioned them. Now we are clear in our minds because we've identified our specific training needs in relation to job responsibilities. We are on the pathway of developing training plans for each of the staff categorizations, professional background, years of experience, qualifications. So depending on staff categorizations, we are able to develop specific training plans. When we got the team come in country, one of the specific requests that we made to them is, yes, we're going to do training for the service, but what we want is a personal development plan for each of the staff. Thinking about what we said earlier on, the value of work, so that people can connect their own personal development plan, whether they want to leave the environment in the next 10 years, they can relate that training that they are having. So as part of the package of stats that we had in Ghana, we are building individual learning profiles. We have identified different training methods, as was indicated, and been able to map and integrate different training needs. What is important about this conversation, especially those of us from the Global South, is always the question of funding. And this is where you need to do some cost-benefit analysis, given the training opportunities that are available. Those that are low-hanging fruit, you can do at a very low cost, and those that require in-person and outside the country. The seventh point that I emphasize is the allocation of time, which is related to what I said earlier on. In a number of the NOCs in the Global South, we have most of our staff that spend most of their time in the field collecting data, which is the reverse in the Global North, where we have a lot of NSOs that have their staff sit in the office, outsource data collection, and really do the analytical side of things. So if you come and you talk about training where staff are interested in allocating their time with field collection to have extra income, then training tends to compete out what their goal is. So we really need to think through the allocation of time because it's a critical resource constraint. Now, we have onboarded the 70-20-10 learning approach, CETSI, the learnings from the UNSD and Statistics Norway, and we are pushing this information through to the National Statistical System. And it's very specific to statistics. And all that is telling us is that it's a critical resource, it is a scarce resource, and what makes it critical is that 70% of the capacity would have to be built on the job. The informal part is only 20%, and what we get from the classroom is 10%. I could get a sense of how my staff were hit by this message, telling them that you have master's degree with statistics from the universities, is contributing to only 10% of the work that you're going to do in the office. All that you're going to learn informally in the office is going to be 20% peer-to-peer learning. If you really want to be fit for the work that you are doing, 70% of it will come from how, as an office, we structure training and you build on your job, especially at a time that we see global evolution on the work that we do. It was mentioned that it's important we learn the culture, we build a culture of learning and the pathways. And this is not staying with the service. This is gone throughout the national statistical system. Next steps, as I indicated, we've rolled out the STAT to the entire national statistical system. We are going to onboard all the players within the national statistical space. What is important is the competency framework that I talked about earlier on. It was built just for the service. Now our arrangement with the National Power of Data is that this competency framework will be onboarded for the entire national statistical system. It will be the basis for recruitment, it will be the basis for promotion, and it will be the basis for earnings as far as statisticians in Ghana are concerned. Then what we're thinking about is technology-driven approaches in doing this, have an M&E framework, and also link this capacity building to value for work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And another example of how STAT really is being driven by our two pilot countries, and very, very grateful to both of you. We'll now have a brief intervention from the director of the UN Statistics Division, Mr. Stefan Schweinfest, who will also say a few words in support of STAT. Over to you, Stefan.
Hi, thank you, Vibeke, and thank you to all of you. It's great to see a room full of people that are caring about our future generations of statisticians, the capacity and training. For me, that's a very passionately important topic. So sorry I'm late, but these days I'm always double booked. I open one event and I close the other event, but I think you were in good hands with Elena for the opening, I'm sure about that, and you had fantastic presentations from Colombia. I just caught about half of that, and in Ghana from Sam. So I'm here because I'm a fan. I'm a fan, I have to confess, of GIST, because for two reasons now. I mean, first of all, I think it's one of those classical examples where we as the UN have the opportunity to connect the dots. We saw a lot of things going on, really good things in Asia and the Pacific. See Marge here, who knows what I'm talking about. See other parts in the world, and where there was training at the national and at the regional level, but it was all everywhere and all over the place. So we thought that we have a global network where we connect all these people who are working on the same things and can perhaps exchange materials, work on strategies, what to prioritize, and perhaps even translate things. Sometimes it's as easy as that. You mentioned the importance of Spanish language translations and so. So I think that was a wonderful opportunity, and I'm glad it has really taken off, that all these passionate and good people around the world that we were able to connect, keep working together. And the second thing why I really love it, it's very practical. It's not, you didn't end up with philosophical debates, and so that's important and also needs to happen. But I mean, you come up with specific tools like the ones that we have here and we are launching today. And I think that's the most important thing, so that we give you something practical to work with. I was impressed by looking at the tools, and I heard really a lot of really impressive things. I mean, it addresses all areas, and not only like specific technical skills, I mean, but the whole HR dimension. You linked it to transformation of your entire system, IT, and so all the dimensions. So, and also the important connection that it's not limited to just your national statistical offices. It becomes actually a tool to communicate with the rest of the national statistical system. And it establishes your position as data stewards, because you get other people to talk to you, not because you say we should coordinate. Nobody wants to coordinate. When they hear the word coordinate, they run in the other direction. But if you have something to offer them, actually, and a concrete project to work together on, then you will get people's attentions and so. And I was impressed. I looked at the tool. It's not only an assessment, it gives you analytical elements. I saw impressive graphs and also the important question of prioritization. I mean, if you make a full assessment of all your training needs and then you see all of your training needs, your first reaction may be that you want to jump into the East River or so, because it's so depressing. But it's actually your pathway to the future. I know there are tons of problems. I mean, where do we get the resources from? How do we make time for training? How do we convince people who are worried about other things and so on and so forth? How do we work together with others? But I think it's great that the tool acknowledges also that discussion on a prioritization. I'm particularly grateful to the countries who were the pilots, and I have to confess to you, when we in the UN use the word pilots, it's a little bit the word for guinea pigs. And I think you've been brave to do that. So, because somebody has to be the pioneer and try it out, and things may go wrong, or as you go along, you may discover that it would have been nice here at this point to actually have this bifurcation. So I think you are part of the early generation, and please give us the feedback. We have Ghana and Colombia, we heard it here, but I also have Mexico, Maldives, Malawi, and Papua New Guinea on my list to thank you. Now, what are the next steps, I would say? I mean, I would hope that from, guinea pigs you turn into ambassadors of the tool. I mean, first of all, give us the feedback so that we collectively keep improving it. And when I say collectively, I'm not talking just about our office. Vibeke is overworked anyway, so she cannot do it. And I think everybody else who is involved in this, but we are doing it together. That's why we have a global network, and so on. Different people in the network can bring different skills. And as I said, sometimes it's as easy as a language skill that makes a tool accessible to a whole new region and part of the world. So yes, we have to bring that out. We have to improve it and bring it out there. And there are avenues like, for instance, in your regional or sub-regional contexts. I mean, I'm a strong believer in mouth-to-mouth propaganda. I mean, if you talk to the countries in your sub-region and you say, that was actually pretty helpful for us, I don't want to come from New York and sell you something. I mean, that sounds always a little bit strange. And then they say, do these people in New York really understand what we need and what needs to be done? But if it's discussed at the regional and sub-regional level, I think that's much more effective. And I see also representatives here from our regional commission, so they can help us with this. And then I challenge all of us to go the next steps. I mean, we have the diagnosis here, but what about the therapy? I mean, we cannot stop just going to the doctor and the doctor tells us exactly, now I know exactly what your disease is, bye. That would not be very helpful. We need to know what is the next step. I mean, so we can, even all of us, map learning opportunities, and you have that already also in your reflections. I saw that. A structure of what is the training. It could be in-country, in-house, on-the-job training. And sometimes we are using our own resources not enough. I even personally experience that sometimes. I have a very busy day and then I have a young professional knocking on my door and telling me I have a problem, could I talk to you? And I'm like, I have these 75 emails to respond to and these 3 things to sign. Sit down, let's talk. And then when I go home at the end of the day, I think maybe all these memos that I signed and the 75 emails that I was firefighting on that day, nobody will remember that in a couple of weeks. But that one conversation, perhaps I have given one of my staff some ideas or orientation and guidance how to look at their own career development and something like that. And I think maybe that was the most valuable thing that I actually did today. But unfortunately, we never set aside that time really to do these kind of things. And I think we need to all think much more smartly of what capacities do we already have in the house and how do we share in in the community. But then sometimes you have to go outside. There is academia, we have many partners, there is e-learning is an exciting tool because many can benefit from it and it connects people across countries. There could be bilateral collaboration that is often expensive, very effective and targeted. But I also believe very much in group training. So I hope if the assessment of the training needs, for instance, helps us from a UN perspective to group countries and then provide strategic training to certain types of countries together, that could have an enormous leverage. And it would not only have the advantage of providing the training, but connecting the people also. I always say the Monday after a training course is important. If you have the email addresses of all of your peers, then you can keep talking to them. And when I say grouping countries, traditionally we were always thinking of real meetings and it was only the people of a particular sub-region could talk to each other. This is a new world. We could classify and group countries who have similar learning needs and types all across the globe and connect them virtually and develop learning tools and learning opportunities. So this is exciting. It's only a first step. I'm thanking all of you for being here and showing your interests, and I'm inviting you to be part of the next step of our journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. With that, I'll hand over to Mitali Sen, who's one of the co-leads of GIST, the co-lead for the task team on addressing NSO demands, which has been key in developing the STAT tool. And Mitali is also from US Census Bureau. So over to you for the Q&A.
Thank you, Vibeke. I'm really happy to be here. We in GIST started 5-6 years ago, hoping to harmonize training, making it a priority, and we couldn't have done all this work without our stakeholder advisory group that constitutes NSOs from the Global South. So there are many in this room we have to thank for coming to this stage of launching the STAT tool. So thank you. And really one of the important things is to the leadership that NSOs show in making training a priority and launch in this launch and taking it forward, as everybody has said. So now I'll open it up to questions. Yes, go ahead, please. Please introduce yourself as you ask. Yes.
My name is Haider Frank. I'm the director of Jordan Statistics. My name is Haider. I'm the director of Jordan Statistics. For me, this is marvelous work, and really, I thank each and every colleague who were involved in this, whether from the countries or from UNSD and others. I just want to attract attention to a couple of things. One that has to do with the perception of training needs. The training needs, in my judgment, comes from the individual, the staff who would like to get training. But there are other sources of creating training needs, like the HR in the NSOs, like the strategic direction of the NSO, and so on. Just to qualify what I'm saying, for example, in my case, some of the needed training or the acknowledged training needs would be for the person to exit the NSO. Perhaps even worse, to leave the entire country to another NSO. So I think we need to perhaps enrich the tools to entertain grasping the training needs from not only from one agency, which is the recipient, but the others as well. The other thing, which is the language and the translation into Spanish and so on, I don't know if my colleague from ITRIS is here, but I think I will push ITRIS, the Arab Institute for Training, to do the Arabic translation, and I will be very happy to help them and help in this endeavor, because we have about 400 million Arab-speaking community and 22 countries, so that I think is valuable. The third and last thing is about the technology and the technical tools. For example, we're talking about training, delivering training, but what about assessing training, quizzing, certification, modulating certain training into a standardized kind of course whenever possible? I think this is important. The more the training institutes that belong to the NSOs are equipped with such, let's say, state-of-the-art or best practice tools, will be wonderful. I think more and more tools, I mean, you showed R and some presentational tools and so on, are important, but I think more and more training track tools, let's say, based on technology, will be highly appreciated. Thank you. Thanks to all.
Thank you, Mr. Fatih. I think there's another. Thank you for your comments. And ATRIS is involved in the network and has offered to translate into Arabic.
Good morning.
So it's very good. Yes.
My name is Ghanshyam. I am additional DG from NSO India. I'm looking after coordination work. So first of all, thank you for all presenters and who contributed to this excellent work. And now I have a related question about this, that training needs, we are identifying training gaps, we are analyzing, prioritizing, but in a countries which many countries may be having setup like us, decentralized setup, where statistical personnel are scattered over different line departments. So training needs, we are identifying and minimizing the gap, but due to the movement of trained officials to the new positions, this keep recurring, that the gap again comes into picture. And continuous training also, it keeps creating this thing. This is the vicious circle, that the trained manpower moves on to the other department and another person comes to this position. And it is because of the transfer and placement policies of our own countries. So how to handle this situation, that how to control this situation, that this gap which has been minimized remains minimum and doesn't recur again? That is my question.
Mm-hmm. Would somebody like to take this question? Answer it?
Maybe perhaps the discussions we were having on establishing a new task team, I think that relates a little bit to your question. And I think one of the things that we hoped also, I think in general with sustainable training approach, is to identify, depending on specific country contexts, identify some kind of solutions that the countries, in fact, would work on them themselves, to be able to minimize this gap, as you say. If the approach is more systematized, you can anticipate what kind of change may happen. I think it's very difficult to prevent a shift, right? But it's more to make sure that when the people get on board it, they know exactly and very rapidly what exactly they have to do, and these opportunities, learning opportunities, are available to them. Yeah.
I think another point is the proper documentation, right? When a staff is in the job, actually documenting the work that they do so that the handover is smoother, which I think relates a lot to the 70-20-10, right? That you actually, in that 70 to 20% of the work, actually have something to get you started. And that way, the training in itself comes through the documentation, and you can kind of pick up and talk with colleagues from there. But it's a lot about the learning culture that also we want to bring into the new task team, right? That I think in many countries, the learning culture is still very focused on the formal trainings, that you think you can't learn without the formal trainings. And that's a mindset that needs to change many places, right? You can do a lot yourself. Also now with all the online tools available, the online materials, when you have internet connectivity, you can take on a lot yourself. And I think that's what we want to also see, how we can provide more practical guidance on how that can be done, knowing that it's a challenge for many who haven't learned this also in the schooling system, maybe in how they've been taught.
Yeah, and I think context matters, right? So you said that you're fragmented, your promotion system is such that you get promoted out to another. So it is for you as a country to figure out what is the best system that will work for you. It's hard for us to make recommendations because every country is different. I think I saw a hand up there. Somebody had a question at the back. Did you have a question? I saw your hand up. Yes? No? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll come around.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Very excellent work that you have done. And I think training is the best example of what we see in the back there. No, South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, right? So I just want to say that, and this is sort of a comment and a question, right? I mean, we have focused the South-South and training on hard skills, on the methodological things, and I think we have that done. And as it has been mentioned, there's also the issue of the soft skills. Mm-hmm. Right, so I think there is something where there's a lot to be done, and I, of course, have to do a plug for the survey that we conducted, on National Statistical of employees of National Statistical Offices, where they point to training as one of the things that they need, they want, but they also point at a lot of, they're very committed to their work, but they're very unsatisfied with their salaries, and that is, I think, where there's a lot of learning to be done. Is how do we make sure that there are the right incentives to train? And I'm going to give an example on the limit. An National Statistical Office that did a master's on official statistics. Mm-hmm. And after everybody finished their master's,
there's no job.
No salary increase, no promotion. And that's the risk is that you train a lot of people and then those people leave if there are no incentives for them to stay. So, I don't know, I think that's also, in this South-South cooperation, what can we learn from other countries in how these non-monetary incentives that were mentioned can be taken into account?
Yes. It's a very good point. I think training should be related to performance, right? I know at the US Census Bureau, one of our evaluations for doing better and better is to have training in the requisite areas. If you have a promotion system that links it directly to training. Any other responses or any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Not really a question, but to put to the floor a conversation that has started in the area of peer learning, and this is related to a couple of issues that have come up, and I think, Stefan, you did mention it. Quite a number of us are not profiling what other NSOs are doing, and we don't visit even NSO sites to benchmark what we are doing with what is happening relative to what you are doing. So the conversation now is to promote peer learning, one that is organic rather than one that is imposed on us by any other organization. But I sit in Ghana, I visit the website of India, and I say that they are producing these statistics, we are not doing it. Yesterday I was having a conversation with my colleague from Namibia. They've done tourism satellite account. The approach that they are using is different from what we are doing in Ghana. So we really need to think about how we can do peer-to-peer learning and also transfer of capacities of people who are going to do the exercise for us. Thank you.
That's another question.
Yes.
And I know for soft skills has come up, and I think our tool actually does address those skills. We address many more than just technical skills. So, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Shahuda from the Maldives. I think delivering the training is also requires a lot of skills. Yeah. So, in case of the statistical office, like you may know something very well, but to teach is also another skill. So, in our case, I think it's very important that we have sort of a training of trainers, that type of capacity. Because we are trying to register training institutions so that we have regular training courses to cater for the national statistical system. But this is the bottleneck that we have, like people to deliver effective trainings. Thank you.
No, thank you. And we are taking that into account in our next task team that we're going to have. Thank you for that. We have another question, and maybe that will be the last question.
Good morning. My name is Nazira Kirimalieva. I'm from National Statistical Committee of the Kyrgyz Republic. And actually, I have very short questions because now we are developing a strategy on improving capacity building in the Statistical Committee in the Kyrgyz Republic. And this strategy is going to be for 3 or 5 years, so we are still in the process. But today I became to ideas that we have really great tool which can help us to understand what we should to teach, what kind of training we should to provide, and this tool can be useful to understand and make some analysis. That's why I have question: do you have plan to translate this tool to the Russian language? And the second question, I know that I think I want to also support this idea, and also how long does it take to make general analysis, because we can understand that every day the demand to the statistics is really increasing, and every day we starting to produce different kinds of statistics. For example, climate change, environment statistics, and and the capacity training is also changing. That's why I was asking, maybe we should to do such kind of analysis, once in 3 years or each year, so just to understand how.
Good point. So in terms of needs changing and capacity changing, I think Stat tool is actually quite flexible. And since it's designed on Google Forms, we've said it's quite customizable. As for Russian, thank you. We depend on the input we get from NSOs. And if that is a need, we are going to tell our translating team, and we will see if we can get somebody on board. GIST doesn't have resources, we don't pay translators. It's us who actually give our time to translate. So, that's how Spanish is happening, French we hope to have, and then Arabic is also happening thanks to people putting in the time. So let us know if you have any Russian. Right now, I don't know whether a translation group has. So thank you. And with that, I will stop the questionnaire, and Vibeke, thank you so much.
Thank you. And with that, I'll hand over to Lasse Sandberg, my fellow country person from Statistics Norway. Over to you, also a member of GIST.
Well, thank you, Vibeke. And I must say, I think this is already a success. See all the people here. If we all take this back home, I think you will see Stat, at least not all over the place, but still in a number of places. Well, since we are sort of over time, I will not use my 5 minutes. I will use 3 minutes, I think. So, firstly, I have to say that being in statistics for, well, almost 40 years, I think what I've seen here in Stat really impressed me. How you have, through the 2 phases, come up with something on competence and skills which really can be used in the NSOs and the NSS, which was mentioned by Professor Sam. That's very important. And to produce official statistics, I really think we need some fundamentals. We need funding, we need data, of course, we need sound methodology, but we need, even in the time of AI, we need people. We need the staff, people who do the actual work here. And for me, our staff, now I'm part of Statistics Norway, but I think I'm talking on behalf of most of you, or all of you. I think our staff is the most valuable resource for producing reliable official statistics. And our staff, all our staff, comes with a certain level of skills and competence. And one important part of our job is to sort of cultivate and educate in a structured way the staff for the future. So we have learned a lot today, and I will not repeat anything about the 2 phases and what you have achieved in Colombia and in Ghana, and also the countries in the first phase. I think that's very important. But I would like to there are 3-4 statements here which you can take back, which I think I read in a report because we have a cooperation between Ghana and Statistics Norway. And I read the report, and I think it's part of what Samuel here mentioned. It's knowledge sharing. That's to move from knowledge is power to a culture of sharing. I think that's very important. Knowledge is actually power, but we should go to culture, to the culture of sharing. And also this about learning culture, to actually prioritize learning for those who need it. And we have heard about the resource constraints. And for me, because we don't use STAT, but we use something which is quite similar in Statistics Norway. And what we see that we try to use young staff as a resource for training others. Use the young staff. That's very important here. And make use of sort of free resources before looking externally. That's to use the internal resources. That's very important. So, to end, many thanks to Charlotte for taking us through the stats. Also for Juliet Alejandro, Solano Villa, an excellent, insightful to see how you have used that in Colombia. And also to Professor Samuel Anim from Ghana. I thought that was also a very insightful presentation. And well, finally, Stefan, I see you are a fan of GIST and STAT. Good, I'm too. So I think, and I also would like to mention the UNDP for hosting this event. Thank you. So finally, I would say for all of you working with STAT, congratulations. Now it's just to roll out the STAT to all countries. Thank you.